Welcome to REVO Woman, where the vibrant voices of our church community come together to explore relevant theological topics and discuss stories of women in the Bible. Here, we'll share a sacred space for women to connect, share, and grow in their spiritual journey with Jesus. So whether you're a seasoned scholar or a newcomer to the Word, REVO Woman invites you to discover and consider the timeless wisdom and empowerment found in the Scriptures. May these conversations help to equip and encourage your next step of faithful obedience in Christ.
Hey friends, welcome into the REVO Woman podcast. My name is Candace. So excited today to have Amy and Josh Edmonds, the first ever married couple on the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Honored.
Josh is the second man, but first ever married couple here. So we are excited to dive into the topic of Priscilla and Aquilla. They are probably the most famous married couple that we get in the Bible, definitely in the New Testament. Paul uses their names in the book of Acts, Romans, Corinthians, and 2 Timothy. And so they're a big deal in the new church. And I think when you look at their names, what's cool is that you always see them together. It's never just, this is what Aquilla did. It's always Priscilla and Aquilla. And so when we were talking about, Priscilla as a woman of faith to talk about on the REVO Woman podcast, we had to acknowledge that Priscilla is strong because she's with Aquilla.
That's right.
That God used them as a team. So today we want to talk about, just the power of teamwork in ministry, especially as a married couple, because that's a unique partnership. We have a lot of different partnerships, but marriage as a partnership. So I'm going to kick it to you guys. Why do you think Paul always used their names together? Why do you think teamwork in a marriage is so important, and how have you seen that impact your own ministry?
Go ahead.
So I just think that teamwork is, it is just integral. So God gave us different gifts. We're both type A. Well, me especially, as many A's as you can have.
For sure.
And Josh is type A, but not as A as me. But we have many, many different gifts that have allowed us to be able to do our ministry together as a team.
Agreed. I think that God's made me and Amy different. Very different in some ways, maybe similar in others. And so that difference is what has allowed us to be effective as we've had the opportunity to be in ministry together for the last 20 or so years. And I think that teamwork, allowing oneself to be used in the context of a team, is what has maybe broadened our impact or perspective or opportunities that God's laid out before us.
Very cool. So we're going to kick to some scripture. So Priscilla and Aquilla, they are first introduced in Acts 18. So I want to read that. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquilla, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent workers by trade, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. And so this is pretty cool. We see that Priscilla and Aquilla, they weren't just friends with Paul. They lived with him. They knew him on a deep, intimate level. So these are people who are being discipled by the most prolific writer in the New Testament.
Right.
Pretty cool stuff. So later in Acts, we see this, Acts 18 through 19. After this, Paul stayed many days longer and then took leave of the brothers and set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquilla. At Century, he had cut his hair, for he was under a vow, and they came to Ephesus, and he left them there, but he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. So Priscilla and Aquilla accompany Paul from Corinth, where they're already exiles, refugees from their home country. Now they're relocating again, and they're moving to Ephesus, and Paul leaves them there. He's like, guys, we've been together for years, but deuces, I'm out.
Right.
So, when I read their story and I'm looking at this, immediately I thought of your story, that, God called you to ministry in North Carolina, but there was a next step.
Sure.
There was a moment when you were called to decide, are we going to stay in our comfort zone, or are we going to step out in faith and move overseas and pursue a life in another country? Right. So tell us about that. Tell us about how your marriage was challenged, strengthened, grown, how your partnership experienced new depth through God calling you to live in a different country.
I think when we first went to Belize, it was just an idea. It was kind of like we wanted to do this before we had kids, and so
it was on my bucket list.
Yeah, it was Amy's bucket list of things that she was requiring us to do before we had kids, because I wanted kids immediately, and we went to Belize, and God birthed something in us, and then as we began to wrestle with that. We began to pray together on it, began to ask what's next, how do we do this? And then ultimately deciding that, hey, we have to go, we have to do it, we have to say yes. And it was God telling us, giving us the opportunity, and we had to say we have to be obedient to this. And it was, to be honest, I was terrified. I'm the husband. I have a wife, and at the time, 2 small kids, and was terrified. And so she has the spiritual gift of faith, and she was the one that was like, "God's got this, Josh." Agree?
I would totally agree. And although I am like miss details, if you look at the story, there's a lot of details that were missing that I was like, God's got this. And so he just called. It was undeniable. God called us. We went on a mission trip in 2007 to Belize for the first time. And then through me not being pregnant, like it was in my plan, and me having a miscarriage, I was able to go back in 2008. And that sparked a whole nother part of our story. But 2009, we were waiting for an adoption. And so I decided not to go to Belize. And God twisted that story, and we ended up pregnant with Madeline. But like we had an entire week away from each other, and we were praying, like, what is our next step? We were helping plant churches at that point in Raleigh, where we were living. And so we were like, what is our next step? And both of us at the end of the week were like, God's telling us to move to Belize. But that was 2009, and we didn't move until 2012.
Yeah, I love, Josh, that you said that you were afraid. And
for sure.
No, but being honest about that, because I think a lot of times people see the end result of our decisions
Right.
and think that those are made from a place of absolute confidence. You know, God takes away all the fear. No, like you had to move forward through that, even though you were afraid. But I love that you pointed out that Amy had more faith than you in that situation.
Yeah.
And there's probably times in your marriage where it was the flip-flop and where you had to encourage and lean on one another. So thanks for just pointing that out, that sometimes one spouse is not going to have enough faith and the other one is going to have to have the faith on behalf of both of you.
Yeah, definitely. I was terrified. I'd gone to school and worked for 10 years in an industry that I was going to walk away from a career and everything else that we had, and say, no, this is what God's called us to do, and so we're going to go and do it. And that meant that our family was going to have to sacrifice, and my kids were going to live a different life than maybe we thought they were going to live, and we were going to live a different life than we thought we were going to live. But that was the calling that God had placed on us, so we were going to be obedient to it. And I was terrified.
Yeah,
and I think that when God really truly calls you into something, all the things that shouldn't or typically don't make sense, he just kind of, at least for me, it's like blinders go up, and it's like God's like, nope. Don't think about those things. I'm going to point you back over and over again to why this is what you're supposed to do. And it helped that we were in like I had a super strong group of women that came alongside me and was like, I can't tell you that this is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. No, when you were talking, it made me think of like when I got my call into ministry to walk out of the business world.
Right.
That was one of the scariest things because I didn't know how the people around me would respond. And I remember the first person who I opened up to and told about this was my husband, Rick. And in that moment, I think about this in hindsight, but he had the opportunity to kick the legs out from under me and tell me that I was being silly, unreasonable. But because he believed in me and spoke into me and encouraged me, that gave me the strength in a very fearful time to step out in faith. So, Yeah, I think that's the power of a marriage on mission. What can happen when you encourage the other, when you believe in the other. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So when you went to Belize, this is something I don't think a whole lot of our church has really experienced, like what it's like to move to a completely different country, speaks a different language, eats a different food, different culture. So how did God lead you as a couple in that environment? How did your faith grow? What were the relationships that helped you progress? Because yes, you were there for each other, but we know that God's plan isn't for us to just live in isolation. So what did that look like?
Yeah, we had some really good friends that we made maybe immediately. We had friends that drove when our family got there, and we came out of the Belize airport, and you walk outside and you see whoever's picking you up. I didn't know who was going to be there. Amy's probably going to cry. I didn't know who was going to be there, and it was my friend Pastor Ed, one of our ministry partners at REVO, and he drove an hour and a half just to say hey, and then we got in a car and went to our house, and that was it. And so it was people like Pastor Ed and his wife Dinah. It was people like my friend Eustace, his wife Dell, that when I would go and visit with them, I spent a lot of time out of the house when we lived in Belize and meeting different ministry partners. When I would go and visit them, Amy's saying, yeah. When I would go and visit them, it was these families that would give me an extra plate of food and say, hey, we understand that Amy might be home with the kids and she's throwing Cheerios on the floor or whatever needs to happen for these kids to eat. Here's Amy's favorite food. Make sure to take it to her. And so, man, it was like God put people in our life, like He did in Paul's life with Priscilla and Aquilla, that were going to be encouragements to us as we were in an unfamiliar place, unfamiliar food, unfamiliar language, all of that. And I was just blessed, like overwhelmingly blessed by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love just the examples of hospitality that you brought up there. The way that you learned hospitality and were ministered to through Pastor Ed and his team. So how we see in the word here, like Priscilla and Aquilla, they moved to Ephesus, and then it goes on to talk about how they start a church in their home. So it's not like coming to the campus.
Sure.
This was a church that was experienced where they lived. They had to invite other people around them, probably a lot of unbelieving people, in to show them who Jesus was through the way that they lived their life. So what did you learn through your experience overseas about what hospitality looks like?
Talk about our house.
Well, so in our house, there was always people. There was just always people. We either had pastors showing up in the middle of the day. It's in Belizean culture. It is to honk your horn as loud as possible as you pass the house.
Right.
So you at least felt like you had them too. But there were some kids. For some reason, there was like 0 kids that lived in our like quick walking distance of our house. But there was these 2 kids, Bella and Christopher, and Madeline saw them one day and was like, please come play with me. Please come play with me. And somebody had donated a swing set. And so we were able to minister to them. They would come over to our house every day after school, and I would do homework with them. 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, they would be at our house, so, and their little baby sister, so that her mom could go to the city to get their groceries for the week, which was 30 minutes away. And then we had one of our dear friends, Kim Bell, who was my best friend there, and her kids, internet has come a long way here, but people could not afford internet. Yeah. But they were required to have internet for some of their assignments. And so we said, well, come to our house. And so her girls would come to our house, and we would feed them, and they would do their homework, and they would help me with their homework, and I would help them with their homework. And just constant people, to the point where by the time we left,
we had 3.
We had 3 additional teenagers living in our house.
Wow.
In a 3-bedroom, 13-square-foot house.
Yeah.
So a mansion.
Yeah,
but it was the giant white house.
We lived in the White House in Belize.
We lived in the White House in Belize. That's what people would call it. And so, but we were like, we have room.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? So we'll make room. We'll rearrange beds. It might be an air mattress if you're here for a few weeks, but we'll figure it out.
And I think like hospitality for us, anybody is welcome at our house at any point. They like we tell our group, hey guys, don't ring the doorbell, just come in. You can come into our house anytime. If you want the garage code, we'll give it to you. Like,
Yeah.
but we're not really good about like, setting out snacks or like, hey Candace, thanks for coming. Can I get you a glass of water or anything?
Yeah.
We're more the people that are like, hey, the kitchen's in there. Like you can take whatever you want. If you go in the pantry, make something, do anything. But
our home is your home, but we're not the like, here's your full spread when you enter our house.
So people think like you don't have the gift of hospitality, but for us, hospitality is like we're going to open up our life to you, and you are absolutely welcome in at any time. Can have whatever you want, but maybe we're not going to make you a charcuterie board or whatever else.
Well, I've heard this explained, like the difference between entertaining and hospitality. And I think I was raised to entertain people.
Okay.
When people come over, the house needs to be perfectly clean, and we're going to set out food and we're going to serve them. And I think it took me a while to understand that the Bible doesn't promote entertaining people.
Okay.
It promotes hospitality.
Sure.
And so what you're talking about is we're welcoming people into our mess, where you don't have a perfect life, but we're willing to open up and share that with you because we want to develop that intimacy. And I think that's the same thing on a Sunday morning. When I think about the church, do we want to be a church that people walk in and think, well, these people have it all together, I don't belong here?
Right.
Or do we want to be a people that are honest and real and welcoming and show them the hospitality of Christ? It's a shift.
Sure.
All right, well, I'm going to jump to our next piece of scripture. So this is Acts 18:24-28. Now a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquilla heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wished to cross to Aquilla, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. When he arrived, he greatly helped those through grace had believed, for he powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. And so I love this piece of scripture because we see that Priscilla and Aquilla were able to pour into this new servant of the Lord, Apollos. And it says that he was an eloquent man. He was competent in the scriptures, but there was still wisdom that they could pour into him. And so, man, I just love seeing this, that it was always God's plan for the church to pour into the next generation.
Right.
So how have you guys been able to experience that through your marriage? What are the ways that God's been able to use your partnership to affect the next generation?
One of the things is realizing that I don't know everything. And so I'm trying to help our kids now realize they don't know anything. We're a quantity time family, and so we spend a lot of time together. And so that means I want to spend a lot of time with our kids. And very early on, when Madeline was young, I would go and eat lunch with her friends just about every Friday. And the reason is because I wanted to have the opportunity to build the relationship. And now Madeline's a little bit older, and her friends are making some pretty important life decisions. They're trying to figure out, is faith real, and how do I grow in this? And so now Amy and I have the opportunity, because of the relationship that we established very early on in Madeline's friends' lives, that now we can help begin to shape and direct those decisions. And so it's been fun trying to do that with the other kids with varying success. Maybe. What do you think, Amy? How have you invested in the next generation?
Well, besides obviously work, I think that opening our house up to foster kids, being able to invest in the kids, because it was the same mentality. We have room. We're going to make room. Our kids all squeezed into one bedroom because they said, we have room. This is what we do. And so why wouldn't we have more people to teach about Jesus? And so I think that looking and reaching the next generation for Jesus looks different in every house. And so I think it's opening your house to the kid. During COVID that we had in our neighbor, and our kid said, well, what are y'all doing on a Sunday morning? And we're like, well, we're watching church. Do you want to come in? And my kids literally had met him like on the side of the road. We were like, just come on in. And now he comes to Revo, and
awesome.
His family is part of our ministry and part of our church family.
And he's been baptized, and his mom's been baptized, and his brother's been baptized.
Yes.
Wow.
So, I mean, I think it's just literally being willing to open the door, to say, God, I'm going to open the door, and then you're going to give me the words to help the next generation.
Yeah. And something really cool that you just mentioned is when you opened up your home to foster care, your children were a part of that. And so not only is it your marriage living on mission, it's your family living on mission. And you're modeling that through the values in your marriage. And they're seeing that. It's not just something that's being said to them.
Right.
You're living it out and you're doing it together. So I love that. I love that discipleship isn't just opening up a Bible study. It's living it out. It's using these examples of helping others to really teach them what it means to follow Jesus.
Yeah, for us, it's like we're Edmonds and we serve. Like that's just a motto, a mantra for our family. That's why we take our kids to Belize with us when we go. That's why they're a part of helping us in an R group when they're doing childcare for the younger kids. They're the ones that are cleaning up the house. That's why I want to have it at our home, is because I want them to realize this is part of who we are. That's why they're here. Every time we have to do something here, that our kids are with us because they're going to serve, they're going to clean up, they're going to set up. It's part of investing in them, and then hopefully they take that to their kids as well.
Yeah, and it's because that's who Jesus was.
Correct.
This isn't just some subjective opinion on the best way to parent. No, this is biblical truth. This is the truth, and you're modeling that. I mean, it's definitely been an influence on me and on our family, seeing parents that this is the way that we're going to serve. This is the way that we're going to involve our kids in that. I mean, I brought my daughter to Belize because I first saw you guys bring your kids to Belize. So the impact that you're having, many times you don't even realize or see. So just kind of an overall general question, but what advice would you offer to married couples seeking to honor God through partnership in marriage? Because we probably have a lot of people in our church who they want to serve God together. This is a desire of their heart, but they just don't really know how, or they just maybe don't know how to get started, or what a next step would look like. So any advice or encouragement that y'all could speak into?
All right, email Josh at discoverrevo.com. But
he will get you plugged in.
I will absolutely get you plugged in. No, but I think there have been so many different seasons of our life.
So many.
When we lived in Belize and our kids were very small, Amy's role in ministry was maintaining an open home and maintaining a very fervent prayer life. And so I was the one that was out seeing miracles. I was the one that was out spending time with pastors and people on a mission trip, and just seeing these radical things all over Central America.
Yeah.
And Amy was the one that was at home, and she was praying. And so one of the things we live our life by is this like principle of no for now, but not forever. And so there may be some people that are married that like it's a no for right now. We can't serve in the same way in the same ministry because of our stage of life or circumstances or situations. And don't be discouraged. That's okay. There's different roles in that. And then Amy and I are also people that like we just serve. We don't wait for a perfect opportunity. It's just, this is the opportunity. It's a yes from us. It's a yes until it's a no. So that's like Amy got me into serving very early on. I don't even know that we were engaged yet. And she was like, hey, if you're the real deal, we're going to serve together. And so that's what started
we did.
What do you think?
I think that it's not necessarily always going to be, I think people look at us now and go, look at all what they do. Their family is all in tow. We've had conversations recently about that. And it's just like, what you didn't see is when we lived in Belize, where literally my job was to be with the kids most of the time, almost all the time, and to be praying at home. And that God had a different season. And that, like, I remember really clear, like when Joseph and Elijah went to school for the first time, and Nathan had told us that we were getting this building. And I said, well, I have 2 days of preschool a week. I can use that, you know, like, so I was like, this is my opportunity to be able to easily do something and use my skills that God has given me. And I think, but that took boldness, you know? And so it's like, okay, God, but you have to be open. So it's like, okay, God gave me this time. How can I use it to serve him versus using it to do what I want to do?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because oftentimes it's like, well, what I wanted to do was be like, I'm going to sit at home and watch TV without any children for a couple hours, you know?
Yeah.
But that doesn't bring you joy. Serving the Lord brings you joy. And so like thinking through like, okay, what has God gifted you in? And oftentimes those things are not necessarily the shiny things, but God's going to use it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point. Just being adaptable, open to the unexpected. You know, we live in a culture that is very much in favor of a life plan. You know, have your retirement mapped out. What are you doing in 5 years, 20 years, 30 years? But I think that's a great point, is just saying, you know, when you're actually living in surrender to Christ and his plan for your life, you're probably going to have to adjust and be open to some of the unexpected. So that's a great example of how God was able to use you through a season where you were seemingly stuck at home.
Right.
Right. And I mean, I went to Africa before we had kids for a few weeks, and it was like God hitting me over the head. I was I had our 25-year plan, like mapped out, like
lived in the dream house, had the
lived
dream
in the dream
car.
house, lived in the dream car. We were going to have, you know, our 2.5 kids with the white picket fence and the whole 9 yards. And they were going to be able to, I was going to never, you know, it was going to be this amazing, in my mind, and what my American mind could think of this was what I was supposed to have.
Yeah.
And then God was like, you are idolizing this life and you need to open the door every step of the way. And so our kids talk about like, well, where are you going to be? What are we going to do in 5 years or whatever? I remember it was 3 years after we lived in our house here. And Madeline said, well, we're going to move again, aren't we? Like, God's going to tell us to move. And I was like, no, God's going to tell us to do something. God's not telling us to move. He's telling us to do this, which was to come on staff at REVO. And it's like, okay, but it's like, okay, what door is God opening? So I don't want everyone to say like, we're going to live in our same house forever.
Right.
We aren't going to be at REVO necessarily forever. We don't know. We might be, we might not, because I have to be open to what God wants us to do.
Yeah.
And so being in that mind of openness to what God has for us is where we always should be.
Yeah. And when you talk about, you know, you went to Africa and then you lived in Belize, it makes me think of, we talked about this in my R group recently, and some lady was like, well, that'll never be me.
Right.
You know, there might be people listening to this who are like, well, that's great for Josh and Amy, but I'm never going to get on a plane, or I'm never going to be a foreign missionary, you know? And so I just want to acknowledge, like, maybe not, you know, maybe that's not God's plan. But I think it's a humbling of your heart to say, if God wants me to do it, no matter what it is, I'm going to do it. And just being open to the unexpected.
And I think that I talk about this a lot with the volunteer team for our world. It's like, God isn't calling you to this big shiny thing that I have necessarily done.
Yeah.
God is calling you every week to help these like 2-year-olds to go to the bathroom in the middle of service.
Yep.
You know, like to be there to hold the crying baby so this mom can go to church. Like that is just as big of a yes as me picking my family up and going there, because you're showing that you are spending your time to serve others, and that serves the Lord.
Yeah.
Versus doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah, like look at the story of Priscilla and Aquilla. Look at Apollos. Look at Paul. They did not have the same call on their life. They didn't live out the same life. And like, you're exactly right. People can hear our story and know something about our family and think that'll never be me. And they're right, because that's not what God told them to do. That's what God told us to do. And so I'm just trying to be obedient with what God told us to do. And that's what, like, I just deeply desire for our church, for anybody that talks to us. Like, let's get clarity from God, and then let me do whatever I can to help you be obedient to that, because that's when you're going to find joy. That's when you're going to find peace. That's when you're going to be talking in 20 years or however long after marriage and saying, like, man, look at everything that God's done. We've just been obedient with what that looks like. And that's the encouragement. Like, that's the next step.
Yeah. So you're 20 plus years into this thing in your relationship. So there's been a lot of fruit through those decades of being together that you couldn't see in the beginning.
Exactly.
And so I want you to speak for a minute just to the single people who are listening. Like, what advice or encouragement or perspective at this point can you offer if they are in the process of considering, is marriage right for me? And if so, what are the things I need to be looking for? Let's speak to those people, because I think that they're equally as interested in what God's plan for them is. Is it to be in a marriage? Is it to live on mission in that way in my life?
I can say for me, I tried to find every boy for the longest time that I could then mold into my own personal mold of what, and then they were going to come to know Jesus and they were going to be this mold that I made.
Luckily, she found a man.
And then I said, there's no absolute way that I was going to marry or date this guy that was trying so hard to date me. And then he served me. So I had knee surgery, and we were in a group of people, and he was like, he just wouldn't, he took care of me. And he put me first. And I said, wait a second, why are you doing this? And he said, well, I know this guy. And then he told me that he did in fact know Jesus, even though he wasn't following Jesus at the time.
Right.
And said, can I go to church with you?
Yeah, I think, man, it's real hard. Like, the question is marriage life for me? Is single life for me?
It's true.
That's a really tough thing to wrestle with. You read the Bible, there's some people in the Bible, Paul is a great example.
It's true.
Like, God called him to live this life of being single. And so there's ways to honor God and live that life. There's ways to honor God and be married. Like the first step is to honor God in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
The next step is, how are you going to find somebody that like you're going to partner with in your life? And Amy and I very early on were like, we're just going to serve. There was an opportunity to serve at a church we went to, and she said, this is what we're going to do. She hoped that I would hate kids. Spoiler alert, I like them. And
It was a plan gone wrong.
but it was just, we're not engaged. We think this is going that way, but she didn't know.
Yeah.
And let's test this out. Let's serve. So I think that's part of it is, all right, if you're in a relationship, what does it look like for you guys to serve together in your relationship? In the community, in the church, like however else. And then if not, like, all right, you have a lot more time when you're not in a relationship. You have a lot less others' consideration. So now sacrifice isn't maybe so big. So now what can I do for God that if I was married or if I had kids, I couldn't do right now? And then what if they just said yes? What if, all right, I'll do it. I have the opportunity. I have the availability. I'm not tied down or whatever that statement means. And I can say yes to God in that.
Yeah. No, multiple really great points you made there that I want to point out. One, marriage is absolutely not God's plan for everyone. And so people might be listening to this, hearing you talk and thinking, well, that's it. That's the goal for my Christian life. And I'm glad that, we talked about this, because it's not, necessarily for everyone. And you don't have a perfect marriage. I don't have a perfect marriage. We're opening up to people, sharing these fruits of Christ's work in our lives and our marriage. And that's what we want to glorify. But it doesn't mean that we don't have problems. It doesn't mean that there aren't obstacles and really hard things that we experience. And that's part of that hospitality, right? Is sharing those things with the people that God brings into your circle. So yeah, thanks for acknowledging that and bringing up Paul here, because he went on to do some pretty incredible things as a single man.
Correct.
And we're gonna celebrate what Priscilla and Aquilla were able to do as a marriage, but we also need to celebrate and acknowledge what God can do through a life of obedient servanthood as a single person.
Correct.
So well, I think that's a great place to wrap. Thank you guys so much for being here, for
Thanks
being
for having
open and honest and just humble in what God's been doing in your life. For the people in our church who are interested in hearing more about Josh and Amy's story, they're open. They are real people, and they are willing to work with you. Josh does marriage counseling within our church, as well as most of our pastoral team. And so we are here as a church to serve you, to partner with you. We believe in the power of what God can do through a marriage on mission. And we're just excited for the future of what he has for our church. So thanks so much for being here, for listening, and we'll see you on our next episode of REVO Woman.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the REVO Woman podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, we invite you to like, comment, and share this episode with a friend so that we can help spread the message and hope found in Jesus. Lastly, you are always welcome to join us for our Sunday services streamed live on YouTube. See you next time.